Welcome to TheoTrade. This is Don Kaufman. It's September 23rd, 2019, and you are watching the TheoTrade evening video. We're just a few minutes after the cash close with the S&Ps up some 9 points. But I must say, net, people, it is quiet out there. The S&P futures today only traded, a handful of contracts north of 1 million. This happens to be one of the most, historically speaking, volatile weeks inside of the marketplace. We are in the final week of September, but you wouldn't know it by looking at the S&P futures. So a rather quiet trading day where we drifted very slightly higher. Nevertheless, there's still quite a bit of action that happened, well, specifically inside of the bond markets that rallied massively all the way back up to 162.5. Again, 162 and 16 ticks, and faded all the way back down to 161 and 9 ticks. But I was talking about what's quiet, what's not so quiet. Well, the bonds out there did 330,000 contracts. If you do not speak market geek, you may not recognize that there's some volume out there inside of the bond market. Today it really was. It was all about bonds. It was all about notes. It's about treasuries right now. Now, with that, we're going to look at a couple of individual kind of issues inside of today's market. One of those being, I'm starting to look at tech. And for those of you that do follow TheoTrade on a day-to-day basis, we have a conglomerate symbol that we've actually built, and it is called, well, lovingly, what we term here, the monsters of tech. That happens to be none other than Facebook, plus Apple, plus Microsoft, plus Google, plus Amazon. We gave it a little bit of a ratio. We called it the monsters of tech. Basically all we did is kind of create our own index product with Microsoft and Apple and Facebook and Amazon and Google. And one of the questions that I got to ask is, hey, are we starting to see some sell-off inside of what we term the monsters of tech? Sure, Apple, okay? It's, finished up today by about 0.45%. We also had Google finish mildly higher today. But if you start to look at a few other the monsters of tech, again, Microsoft, that may have actually achieved what we often term a kind of a key reversal. Again, it's down negligibly today, but in what has been a rather quiet marketplace, it is undoubtable, it stands out that you have major tech companies that are seeing a bit of sell-side activity. Then we take a look at Facebook. All right, it's 2 down days, but does 2 down days quantify a decent-sized sell-off? Well, I'll tell you what. In something like Facebook, it really starts to stand out. Obviously, some of the heavy volume that came in, that was last Friday. All right, it's a triple, it's a quadruple witching. Push that aside for a second. But again, some fairly heavy volume and heavy activity inside of Facebook. Then, of course, we're going to bring up none other than Amazon, seeing, again, effectively some of the same kind of activities that we're seeing inside of Facebook. Before you know it, this starts to become a little bit of a trend, if you will. So Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, all seeing some decent sell-side activity. Not to mention, and again, if you do take a look at Apple, also struggling in some of the recent trading sessions, although, as I said, finishing up higher today. Now, the Netflix, well, listen, okay, it's not what I would term that quintessential monsters of tech. Its market cap in Netflix, okay, isn't nearly the size of an Apple or Facebook and an Amazon, but it's definitely worth mentioning because Netflix often moves, okay, in terms of day-to-day movement. And we could talk about implied volatility, or we could talk about historical volatility, which is actual price movement, because Netflix often moves almost twice as much as something like an Apple does. Okay, it definitely shoves a lot of market cap around. Nevertheless, Netflix, this thing cannot catch a bid to save itself. And I was mentioning this over the weekend. If you take a look down at option statistics, the implied volatility inside of Netflix, and specifically what we term an IV rank, is only the 49th percentile. Effectively, what that means, well, there's a nice way to put this. We're going to come down to add studies, go to volatility studies, pull up implied volatility. All right, we're going to zoom out for just a moment. Listen, Netflix IV, it's only really kind of middle of the road, and that's with earnings coming out. So even though we're seeing some considerable quote unquote risk coming into Netflix, its implied volatility isn't necessarily denoting that this is, the absolute bitter end. Effectively, what does that mean? It means that Netflix could see a lot more pain to actually bring the implied volatility higher and possibly to a capitulation level. But the bottom line is right now, just nowhere near it. Okay, and we're starting again to see this rotation, if you will, out of what we term these monsters of tech. Even though, again, today, the monsters of tech are down less than 0.3%. It's pretty shocking to see, okay, the monsters of tech down, and yet the Nasdaq on the trading session finishes net ever so slightly higher. I mean, you've got a veritable slop fest when you start looking at this. And by the way, I quantify my slop fest by saying, look, the S&P 100, it couldn't be more than a 50-50 out there. These kind of wild rotations kind of continue in the marketplace. Well, a few other aspects I want to mention, okay, inside of today's action. Obviously, we're going to be looking extensively in terms of tech, especially in the days to come. It's also a bit of a head scratcher when you start to look at something like the financials, the XLF, which end of the day, we'll call this unchanged. But the surprising aspect is, how are these financials up anything with bonds up? Because bonds, notes, when they're up, it effectively takes interest rates down, and yet financials, okay, are up at the same time that interest rates are coming down a little bit. Again, it's a bit of a catch-22 in there. I'm also going to show you one other really interesting aspect. If you take a look at the SPX, the mother of all products. So yesterday, as of yesterday, this happened to be none other than a $47, again, a $47 expected move. Take a look at the expected move now inside of the SPX. Okay, for the September 27th expiration, that thing dropped all the way down, okay, to $32. I mean, what I'm saying is in here, there has been a really substantial volatility crush. I'm going to give you another look at it, okay, here in just a moment. This is the September 27th expiration as of yesterday, which is effectively the weekend trade, right? It was about $47 on about a $14, or sorry, I should say 14%. Again, $47 expected move on a 14% IV. Okay, here we've had an implied volatility crush. We're all the way down to, well, just less than 12% on a $32 move. But at the exact same time that that's going on, okay, you have volatility futures, all right, 23 days from now, yeah, they're down. But here's the real head scratcher. When you start looking further out in time, okay, you've actually got volatility futures 58 and 86 days out. I mean, effectively, they're trading at the exact same level. So we're not in contango. We're not necessarily in backwardation. Again, there are conflicting signals all over this marketplace. And that's exactly why I wanted to key into, again, today, the monsters of tech, because there's weakness, again, in effectively what is the largest sector out there. In this marketplace, being up, 7, 8, 9, even 10 points by the end of the day is also, it's incredibly resilient given the fact that the euro, okay, specifically Germany, had horrific financial news out there. Their PMI numbers were terrible, okay, in the early trade, actually taking German markets and most of the European markets down. Again, U.S. markets absolutely resilient in the face of all of that. Nevertheless, in just the next couple of days, we want to see if some of the sell-side activity is going to be persistent inside of those monsters of tech. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here at TheoTrade. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.